Hi, everyone. This is Youth Move Colorado, the podcast. This is the interview with Jane Ritter about legislative services that she's going to give to us today.
The material and information presented here is provided by lived experience youth and for general information purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are of the guests of our podcast own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Youth Move.
How are you, Jane?
I'm good. Thank you. It's kind of bizarre being on a podcast, but I think I can handle it. I'll do it.
Okay, sounds good. First of all, could you just describe what the legislative services are and what type of things your office does?
Sure. I work for the Office of Legislative Legal Services. There's another kind of nonpartisan legislative office. So we're the legal branch. And the easiest way to describe it is we're like the law firm for the General Assembly, for the state legislature. So the attorneys in our office, there's about 45 attorneys now. We've hired a lot recently, so I'm not sure. We work for all 100 members of the legislature. We're nonpartisan, which means that we work for Republicans and Democrats alike. So regardless of what your policy perspective is, sometimes you just have to draft a bill and smile. So I would say about 80% of what we do involves drafting legislation, writing bills and amendments to the bills once legislature gets going. So all that means basically is we write the laws and the representatives and senators sort of hack it up, do what they want to do with it and decide the policy issues. We don't weigh in on anything policy related. So if they ask us a question like, what do you think the best way to accomplish X would be? We just sort of shake our head and say, that's up to you. You tell us what you want. We'll write it in nice language and then you can decide how it goes. So we don't get involved in policy, but we write laws that then they decide whether it's a good policy or bad policy for the state. Or, well, I guess I shouldn't say a good policy or bad policy, whether it's a policy that they as a group, as the General Assembly decides, is a policy that they want to have implemented in the state. So that's our main job. We do a bunch of other smaller things when the legislative session is over. Like we review administrative rules, which just means so the different executive departments like Department of Human Services, Department of Law, Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing, all those ones that the governor creates. A lot of times in statute, you'll see something that says they're authorized to promulgate rules. So the rules are something below the laws. Those departments promulgate them, and we review those to make sure that they haven't overstepped their bounds and tried to do something that the legislature hasn't said they can do. So those are the main things. Anything else
Wow.
is just toast.
That sounds like a long process, like a lengthy
It
process
is.
just to get like one bill or one law just passed so everyone can agree on it.
Yeah, it is. And in a typical session, a drafter like me can have, like right now, I have 38 bills in my queue. They may or may not get introduced. They may or may not go anywhere. And I'll definitely have more by the end of the session because they just keep requesting them. And some are harder than others. So it's like you might have one bill that takes you, an hour or so to draft, and then it has no amendments through the entire session, and you don't have to worry about it. And then there's others that are they just suck up your time like nobody's business. And yeah, and the session is 120 days. And by the end, you feel like you've been through a meat grinder and you don't want to be in the Capitol anymore. But
Yeah, I can only imagine like how much you have to do and then how much you have to go through. um,
yeah, it
I
gets
also
it
wanted
gets
to,
pretty intense.
yeah, I also wanted to ask you, what motivated you to have this career in this type of work? Because it seems like, you like advocating for like nonprofits, but then you're on the legal side of things, which is like a little bit different or a lot
Yeah,
different.
yeah. I spent the first part of my career after college working for nonprofits. And then I ended up going to law school, and I had these visions of what kind of attorney I would be. Basically, just your kind of go to court and advocate for battered women and abused kids and, those sorts of things. But had a little monkey wrench thrown in there when I got a brain tumor. And after that, I finished law school, but I wasn't able initially to be able to think on my feet very fast, which now I can because a lot of times I get called upon to have to go up to and testify in front of committee or whatever. But going into court and litigating, that was off the table. So, fortunately, I had this guy came and spoke to one of my seminar classes at the law school. He didn't work at Legal Service Office of Legislative Legal Services, but he knew about our office. And the assignment that he was talking to us about had to do with drafting legislation, fake legislation for the class. But he says, there's a whole office of people that work in the basement of the Capitol to do just this and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, that sounds like something I could do. Sounds interesting because I loved writing and I loved like the nitpicky details of it all. And you have to, watch out for any sort of potential pitfalls that might occur, conflicts with other laws. So I found a contact at my office, my now office, and just started hounding her mercilessly. We'd go to coffee and like every month I'd contact her and say, hey, you want to have coffee? That. And so I'd come down and, we'd meet at a coffee shop about a block away from the Capitol and it paid off because we don't have many openings in our office. And so fortunately, when I graduated, they did have a couple openings. And so she put my name in and it took a long process that too, because government jobs take forever to like go from start to finish. But that's how I found out about it. And that's how I ended up there 20 years ago or so. And it's been a great fit.
That sounds so awesome. That's a great
Yeah.
story, about, I mean, besides like your health declines and then,
Besides the brain tumor.
yeah.
No, it's, the brain tumor is like, you got to take things like that and turn them into a positive. And it really is a good example of that, how it changed the direction of my life in a great way.
Yeah, that's awesome. Are you still like cancer free now?
Actually, it wasn't cancerous. It was not benign. I
Oh,
like to make that distinction because benign just means harmless. But it wasn't cancerous, but it was big enough that it would eventually pressed on my brainstem. That's not a good thing. But
yeah.
yeah, I had surgery and they got it all out of there. And I haven't, on all the subsequent MRIs, it's all been good.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
The next question I want to ask you is how has this work been either like intimidating for you or rewarding or like maybe a mixture of both?
Yeah, definitely. Initially, it was very intimidating. Fresh out of law school, I was the first person that the office ever hired fresh out of law school. And like, they don't teach you things in law school about how the state law works really and how all that. And so it was all totally brand new. It was like, I didn't know what I was doing. And I started just a few days before the legislative session started and no one had the time to train me. Like, hey, help me. Um, so it was really intimidating because you know that you're creating laws for the state and they're going to seriously impact people. And on our team, we do a lot of criminal law, we do education law, we don't do human services, juvenile justice. I mean, things that are like really like all the different teams do things that are going to affect people. But I always feel like our team, I mean, the things that we draft in are super personal. They're very personal people, like crimes and dependency and neglect and things like that. And if you know that you're drafting a law in that and it could seriously change somebody's life and impact it for better or for worse, it's really intimidating at the beginning. But as the years went on, and I didn't screw up and send anybody to jail that I shouldn't have, I don't think. It was very empowering to know that I was really good at what I did and I was able to take ideas that either the legislators brought to me or they sent lobbyists or stakeholders to me and said, hey, can you make this something? And I was able to take that and make it into something that worked for the state that ends up being really empowering. And you feel really good about what you do for a living. And then also like when you help in committee or on the floor and you help get them back on track because they get they being the legislators, they're not quite sure sometimes what the bill is doing or saying because they might not, it might not be their bill and they're asking questions about it. They haven't had the time to read it and work on it and all of that because it's a lot. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of legislation every year and nobody has time to read all that stuff. So if you're able to if they start, going down the wrong path and they call you up to the table to testify and you're able to kind of get things back on track, that feels really good too because you know that, you helped them understand what was happening in the bill and then they can make an informed decision. So, yeah, I feel like now at this point after 20 years, I feel really like I can take on any bill that they toss at me and draft it and I know when it's not sounding right or working right or, I can I can handle it. So, it's good. But it was definitely intimidating at the start for the first like 5 years. It's a steep learning curve. Very steep.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds intimidating and kind of just scary. Like you're just writing, actual laws that people have to follow or else something bad happens to
Yeah.
them. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
It's crazy.
yeah. So when a bill does get drafted and you have to change it, like how do you go about developing the language for it to be like an actual bill?
Good question. So typically, bill requests come to us in a couple different forms. One is what I like to call there ought to be a law. So a legislator will hear about something in the news and they're like, oh God, there needs to be a law about that. And they'll come to our office and they'll put in a bill request saying, we need to have a law to make sure that this doesn't happen. And a lot of times we, the attorneys in our office, have to say, well, there is a law. It's just an enforcement issue. So do you want a bill that beefs up enforcement or, the penalties or what? And a good example of that is if like there's a terrible murder in the paper and, legislator comes in and says, oh my gosh, we need to have a law that keeps this from happening again. And we say, well, there is a law against murder. There's big law, but the issue is like how are you going to enforce it stronger? Do you going to, put more money into more law enforcement? Are you going to, beef up the court penalty, the penalties and sentences? Are you going to try and create better restorative justice programs so there's no recidivism and things like that because there's already law, but they come in with this idea and that's all. And so we have to really kind of flesh out like where that idea is going, like what exactly it is they want. Because a lot of times what they think they want isn't what they want, or it's not what they need because it's already in place. A lot of other times they'll send in some just vague language about here's the concept and go forward and make it a law, make it a bill draft. And so you just have to kind of build it up from there. I mean, like grant programs, there's standard language for grant programs, and you just have to find out what the purposes are and how much they want to spend and things like that. Other times you get a really like 10, 12, 20 pages of language from them. And they think that whether it's them or the lobbyists and stakeholders, they think it's all taken care of, it's all written, and we just cut and paste it. And that's not what we do. We have to make sure it doesn't conflict with other laws that are on the books and make sure that the cross references are there and make sure that the writing is good, which is a big part of what we do. You have to be a good writer to be able to do what we do. And, they just keep fine tuning it. And, after we finish a draft, we send it to our group of editors who are amazing people. They make us not look like idiots because they catch all kinds of stuff, everything from punctuation and typos and stuff like that to the bigger things like, this doesn't make any sense, Jane, this sentence or this paragraph, maybe let's talk about rewriting it in the way that a regular person could read and make sense of. So after we write, they clean it up and help us with that. And then it goes to a revisor, and that's another attorney. So someone like me or my team leader will read through the bill draft and we look for more legal type issues that might be in the draft. Like, did you consider this? Or, oh, you have to make sure that you handle that part because it's conflicting with blah, blah, or things like that. And then it just keeps circling around because then you send it back to the the legislator and the lobbyists and the stakeholders, and then they send it back to you, and then you send it back to the editors. So it goes around and around and around, and then it's eventually introduced. And then after that, there's almost always a bunch of amendments, which are just things that change the bills. And then those get hashed out and voted on yes or no, and it'll change the bill one way or the other. And sometimes it'll change the whole bill. Like they'll have something that strikes everything and put something else in place, but it has to still be the same topic.
So I'm just
Okay.
curious because a lot of bills are infamous for being very, very long. For example, the American Rescue Plan was hundreds of pages long. There was another COVID relief bill that was 5,000 pages long, if I'm not mistaken. And a lot of members of the legislature, whether that be at the state level or at the national level, I remember when watching Fahrenheit 9/11,
Oh,
I forgot his name. I think his name
I
was John Conyers, and he admitted that most people don't read the bills, or most of the time. So, do you believe that there is a more efficient way of not only making sure that the bill accomplishes its intended effect, but also at the same time, the lawmakers have the ability to not only read it, but make a very informed decision without taking up too much of their time? Just want to hear this from the perspective of someone that writes the bills.
yeah. No, that's a very valid question and point. So there's a huge difference between state and federal, with Colorado, at least. I don't know about other states, I'm sure is the same. And those gigantic bills with everything under the sun in them, those are the federal bills because they can put anything in those bills, and they do. They just stick it in the middle or tack it on the end or, whatever. And I forget what it's called, pork belly or something like weird like that. I don't know. But in Colorado, at least, we have in our constitution that every bill has to have a single subject. And that helps a lot because the title of the bill is the single subject of the bill. And that can be narrow or broad. It could be like, I could have a bill that says concerning youth, and it could have everything in there from a grant program to help get youth off the street. It could include things about dependency and neglect. It could include, well, anything that was related to youth. You're not going to get a lot of bills with that broad of a title because the sponsor of the bill doesn't want people coming in and adding all sorts of amendments to it or trying to add amendments. Like you're not guaranteed that the amendments. So we try and make the bill title as narrow as possible, yet still describe that single subject. So it could be concerning the creation of a program to concerning the creation of a podcast to broadcast the needs of formerly homeless youth or something like that. So then it would just be like, that's all that bill could talk about. That's all. It could talk about what would be in the podcast, who would be responsible for the podcast, what kind of funding would be allowed or not allowed, whichever, they wanted to do, whichever road they wanted to go down. But you couldn't talk about anything else. Even if it had to do with homeless youth, it would have to be about the podcast. So in Colorado, that really helps us limit the length of the bills. And it's always a bit of a tension when you're drafting the bill before it gets introduced. Because once it's introduced, you can only narrow it. You can't broaden it. So somebody couldn't take that title of creation of a podcast to reach out to formerly homeless youth, and they couldn't change that to concerning homeless youth because that makes it big. And you can't do that. You could only go like creation of a one-time podcast or something stupid like that. So that helps a lot with that. Another thing that does help in Colorado with allowing members to be more knowledgeable about the bills and able to read them is they're all assigned to different committees. And usually, I don't know, maybe 2, sometimes 3 committees. And so that allows them to focus their knowledge, focus their expertise, and focus their time on the bills that come to those committees. So if you're on judiciary, you're not going to have to read a bunch of agriculture bills unless you're really interested in agriculture, in which case have at it, read the ag bills. But, and they should know about them when they get to second reading on the floor, but they may or may not. But it's You have some members that spend more time reading. I'll just say it. Some members spend more time reading the bills than others, and it's a lot. Like I said, it's a lot, but it's not like at the federal level where you've got those 1,000-page bills. So, does that answer your question?
No, I think that was a very thorough answer.
Too thorough?
I don't think it was too thorough. I think it's very understandable. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So another thing is like, how would a youth or like a young adult like myself get involved and approach like the legislator to get a bill developed? Or could we even do that?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. I mean, any citizen can do that, can approach their legislators. There's a few different ways. The most direct is to learn who your representative is and who your senator is. And you can do that. There's all sorts of ways online to like look up by your zip code or whatever. And there's also the Colorado Youth Advisory Council, and they've got a great website. I think it's just COYAC, COYAC.org. And I think you can even look up your representative or senator on there. And they talk a lot about like bills that are affecting youth, and their whole they're representing youth. They're supposed to be representing youth for the state. Like I drafted the initial bill for that back in, I don't even know, 2006 or something bizarre like that. And they're still around, and they do a lot of good work, and they really advocate for the needs of youth. And they approach during the interim, like not during the session, they approach the legislators that are a part of that, the COYAC, and say, here are the top priorities, that the youth have identified, because they're supposed to like go to the people in their high school or whatever and try and come up with the top priorities, and then come up with the bills that they want to have the legislator sponsor for them. So you can contact the COYAC people, and again, go to their website, and I think there's a contact page. Say, hey, this is an issue I think is important, or you can even try and get on COYAC. I don't know. I think it's like if you're past high school, I don't know how much it's changed, but I think you have to just be high school level, and not beyond. But they might have changed the membership on that. But they have a kind of a more direct pipeline to the legislators. Another thing that you can do is you can go to the General Assembly website, which is, oh God, do you think I would know this by heart? I think it's leg.colorado.gov, but you can just search Colorado General Assembly. And then there's a tab for bills, and you can just do a search under that. And you just put in, a word to search for. And like you can search for homeless or youth or suicide or whatever, and it'll bring up bills, including bills that are being introduced that session. And you can always go testify either remotely or in person. In person is always better, at a committee hearing. And I can tell you, after going to a lot of committee hearings on bills that deal with youth and other issues, when people come and tell personal stories, the legislators actually listen, and they listen hard, and they like to hear what's going on with people when they come and testify. And I've seen votes changed because of those testimonies and those stories. So that's another way, you have to go to the trouble of tracking down which bills are going on that year, that session, and then when they're going to end up in committee. And it's a bit of a whatever, but I think the people in COYAC can also help with that, because they're kind of attuned into that. So those are the main ways. One, just contact your person directly. One, there's COYAC, and then 3, do your own legwork on the General Assembly website.
Would that be the same process as like advocating for bills that affect youth in the same way? Like, for example, the camping ban, like here in Boulder, if we wanted to like change the camping ban because it affects homeless youth, would we go to like the legislative and the COYAC and all of that still, or
Uh,
is that a different process?
well, for that, that's probably a Boulder thing, like a Boulder City Council thing. It's the same sort of process. Like you
Oh,
would want to go testify at the city council meeting, find out when they're meeting, when that the proposal is being heard, and you go and you sign up and you try and testify. So it's the same process, but it's not like the state doesn't have any, like, there might be a state bill that gets run that says, like, no city and county or city or municipality can enact an ordinance that bans camping, whatever. But if that isn't one of the bills for that session, then you have to, like, go where there's actually being something proposed, at the
Oh,
level. So
okay.
whether it's the, city or city and county or, whatever level it's at, then you go there. And then when it gets up to a state level, if there's a bill, then you go there.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Also, what have you noticed about nonprofits that are involved?
Uh, that's a really good question. Like, they're all very passionate, obviously, about what they do and their cause and their mission. They all care a lot about helping the people that they're involved with. They aren't all super knowledgeable about the limitations of the state government. For instance, there's only certain things that the state can legislate over. Like, if I draft a bill in education, K-12 education, I can't say it doesn't apply to private schools. It just, we can't, that's not what we can do, because private is private. And so we can't, the state, can't make laws that, I mean, with exceptions, but in general, we're there to, like, make laws about the citizens and government entities and things like that. But it's hard to make laws that affect a lot of private entities. Obviously we could do things that, affect businesses as a whole and things like that. So it has to be, like, as a whole. And the other thing about nonprofits that I've encountered a lot that's hard for them to understand is the financial restraints that the state faces and how much something they might be wanting to do costs. Because it might seem like, well, this won't cost a lot. And then the fiscal analysts that we work with get a hold of the bill. Turns out that, the state agencies say, no, this is going to cost a lot to be able to implement this, in which case the bill has to get, you know, whittled down and cut back. And so those were the things about the nonprofits, is that I think if they were more aware of the limitations of what the state can do, it would be helpful, because they're all super passionate, but that can only get you so far, sadly. If passion could get us all somewhere, then we'd be a better state, but better country even. But
So
Yeah.
I want to maybe shift gears a little bit
okay.
and go on to the topic of navigating stress, because we've talked about this in previous podcasts, and we think that this is very important for young professionals or people that are about to enter the professional world. And especially considering your work, where there's frequently a lot of urgency. I remember when I was part of a legislative advocacy group at my college, we had to follow bills from a very short session, and one amendment or two or a delay in the reading of the bill could result in the bill dying. So
Yep.
the point that I'm trying to make is that there is a lot of urgency associated with your work. So, how do you navigate the stresses of having to write bills, especially very urgent bills?
By urgent, do you mean just time wise, or urgent in the sense of they're being considered super important, or
They're being
what
considered
level?
super important. The
Like, for instance,
legislature
firearm
real
bills.
the legislature really wants, like, for example, those that want the bill written, they really want it to be read. They really want to get the job done. That's what I mean by urgent is,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So how do you navigate this kind of stress?
Um, yeah. Part of it just comes from, I've been doing this for a long time, so I know how to prioritize, when things get thrown at me. Because with amendments, they're it seems like they're always last minute, right? 5 o'clock, the emails start pouring in, and you're like, I was leaving. Okay. I want to turn my computer off and not read those emails because they want the amendments for when they convene at 9 o'clock the next morning, or at the very best for the committee the next afternoon. But if you learn how to prioritize them, like look at them all at once and say, okay, this one's going to take a long time. These ones are just really short, boom, boom, boom. And different people do it different ways. Like some people like to get the little ones out of the way fast, like, oh, this will make them feel good. I'm just da, da, da. And other people like, I'm going to handle this big one right away, and da, da. And you have to just kind of learn your own sense of structure, for lack of a better word, like how it works best for you to approach something. And it's the same with drafting the bill on the outset. Like there's some builds that I want to avoid at all costs, and I just put them off and put them off and put them off, and then I'm like, God, Shane, you've got to draft this bill. You've got to just face it. And then by the end of the day, it's done. I'm like, why did I put that off? But I had let that stress about like, oh, I got that bill, and then it build up inside of me for, sometimes weeks because I wouldn't face it. So part of it is just, you have to just learn, like, if you're feeling that, just face it. Just, okay, I got to do this now. And then it'll be done, it'll be gone. It's all good. Another part is, no, you have to take a break. And that's a super hard thing for people in my office to learn. I've watched it with a lot of new attorneys and new editors and stuff. Sometimes you just have to walk away. Even if those amendments have piled up, even if you've got bills to the ceiling that you got to draft, you just got to just like leave for however long it takes you to take a breath and whatever. And I know that's kind of corny sounding, but your brain can only take so much. And when your brain is getting beat up, then the rest of your body's getting beat up. So I try not to beat my brain up too much.
I have a question like about your work, like just daily work schedule. Do you guys like take breaks? Like, do you guys like just take breaks all at once, or do you guys like individually like just take breaks and or go have lunch or something? Like, how does that work?
The editors are their function during session, at least, is a lot more. They're able to schedule. They have a pretty set schedule with, and that every once in a while something will come up when they can't take their lunch break or whatever. But their work is like anybody. Like if something gets dropped into the basket to get edited or whatever, anybody can take it. It's not like one editor has to work on, one bill and all the amendments to that bill. So anybody can take it, and they, can circulate everything that way. So they can set up a pretty structured schedule for during interim, like they know when they're going to take lunch, and they're really good about doing that. And that helps them take that breath and not be stressed out. And again, there's always exceptions. Like, last year we had a bill where, the drafter came into the office. She walked into the office at like 5 o'clock, and she goes, I have 100 amendments coming in for tomorrow morning. Whoever can help me, please help. And so we all just stayed and we helped. We all just took batches of amendments, and including the editors, and we got it all done. But as far as the attorneys during session, it's up to you to make your time. When your committees are going to start, if you're going to have a bill in committee. One thing going back to your question, Cooper, that's helped a lot for me at least, in terms of dealing with stress and urgency and stuff, is like now, since COVID, we have a lot of remote policies in place. So we can attend and participate in committee hearings remotely. So, before committees, like if we've got bills in House Judiciary, which tends to go super late at night, go home before they start your bill. And then, you're done driving, you can eat, you can, get your pajama pants on and just leave your nice top on. And just sort of, you just listen out of the, one ear, and when things are going awry, and you better listen more carefully. But then you're home and you're done. And like, if you're more relaxed overall than if you're sitting in the Capitol the whole time listening to it, because it just helps with that stress. And then in terms of scheduling, to your question, Savannah, the committees, I mean, we know when they're going to start, typically. We don't know how long they're going to last. And when, a certain bill, like you might have 3 bills on House Judiciary, and there might be 3 other bills on House Judiciary, and your 3 bills might be number 2, number 4, and number 6, but they can always change it. And, the chair can say, well, we're going to hear, you know, House Bill whatever, which was last on the calendar. We're going to hear that first, and we're going to hear the last one last, the first one last. And so yeah, you can't, you're not master of your own time at all. And you just have to be super flexible about that. And you'll have bills in two different committees at the same time. And that goes back to having to be able to prioritize and know which are most likely to need you. Yeah, just more stress.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all the questions. If Cooper doesn't have anything to add.
No, I think today's conversation was very good and productive, especially for those that want to get more involved with this kind of work. So, really glad that you could take the time today to talk with us.
Thank you. My pleasure. And let me just mention, and just to tell people that, like, don't ever give up on yourself and don't ever whatever. I dropped out of high school way back in 1978. I ran away from high school. I was a homeless youth for off and on for a few months here and there and stuff. And look at me now. But no, you just keep moving forward and things happen. You just take those hands that are handed out to you and, take the help and good things happen. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for being here and giving this wonderful information to us and helping our podcast out, like our podcast listeners, getting all this information. I'm sure they appreciate it too.
Good. I hope so.
So that concludes our podcast for today for Usman, Colorado, Jane Ritter, about the legislative services and what legislative does. Thank you.
Thank you.